As usual, in terms of housekeeping, please keep yourself on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. If you have questions, feel free to ask as we go, unless Bruce or Ronnie and Candace have asked you to hold on. And yeah, I think that's it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. Bruce, it's all you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a blustery, can you hear me? Yep, it's a blustery, drizzly, cold day, and we had a flicker in our power, so if you suddenly lose me, that could be what's happened in here. I am just going to finish off talking about some of the panel cleanup and touch into panel management. I think, one of the things I would hope that everybody has found is challenging so far is that when you're dealing with different EMRs, every EMR is different on how you can look at this, and every physician is different. Where people are at is all over the map. There's some people that have been very diligent and very good and have very clear ideas on what they're doing as far as coding in their EMR, keeping track of things and what they want from their EMR, and their meaningful use level is quite high. And others, not so much. And the interesting thing is a lot of the emails that I've been getting have been around what physicians' interpretation is of how they're coding. And I hear a lot of people mention that they're coding certain conditions one way or another. I hear a lot of the 70-80 codes being used for different things, and people having some fairly set ideas on how they're putting things into their problem list and how they're making their billing. So it's all really challenging for you, and as you can see, what we're doing now is probably one of the first attempts to really work with physicians at trying to standardize what they're doing with their coding. There's a reason that the codes are what they are and why they are listed the way they are in the spreadsheet that talks about what each condition's code is. And that reason is because these have been agreed upon standards. The other thing that you see with that is that ICD-9 doesn't begin to completely cover all of the codes. And today we're going to spend probably most of our time on just two of the conditions that we're looking at for chronic disease management. And they are going to be probably some of the more challenging ones you'll have to deal with. And fortunately or unfortunately, they are also the ones that maybe two of the ones that are most important in the context of patient medical. And we're talking about frailty and end of life. Part of what we're looking at with patient medical home is in a common or shared care plan, two of the things that are very important to be recording are patient self-management goals and patient wishes. Self-management goals and people's level of functionality is quite key. It's very patient-centric, and it really helps not only the physician, but other organizations determine what level of resources may be required. So a practice with a lot of patients that are nearing end of life, who are higher on the frailty scale, are going to require a lot more resources than a practice with few frail people and a younger population. So you can see that knowing your practice and knowing who the frail people are, how frail they are, and where people are on the continuum of their lifespan is going to be critical to being able to predict the health resources that are going to be required in a community, in a practice, in a region, and in the province coming into the future. So this is quite critical, but it is also, as I mentioned before, also fraught with a lot of potential pit holes. So if we jump into frailty first, the way that frailty has been officially coded is that through the GPSC incentive funding, when people are billing for the complex patient frail code, they're being asked to code in the diagnosis with the code V Victor 15. Now, V15 is not actually an ICD-9 code, and many of you have pointed that out. But the challenge is that is what in the GPSC incentive coding they're looking for. So many people, when they're dealing with frailty, will code whatever it is, the condition that's causing the most frailty or that they feel is most significant. So it may be something like congestive heart failure. It may be osteoporosis. It could be rheumatoid arthritis, anything that is interfering with the patient's functionality. So ICD-9 does not actually have a code for frailty. However, if you're looking at the spreadsheet that has, I hope, been distributed that talks about determining patient panel size and correct coding, which was the last update was September 13th, 2016. It lists looking for an ICD-9 code V15 or a SNOMED code, and it's a 9-digit number, 248279007. Don't write that down. This place that it can be looked up. SNOMED has what's called, in its coding system, it doesn't work in a hierarchical type of system. So this code that I just gave you is what's called the parent code for frailty. And under that are child codes, one's for mild, one's for moderate, and one's for severe frailty, that have nothing to do with and look nothing like that 9-digit parent code. And part of the reason for that is that in SNOMED, it was never intended that the actual numerical value was used to help determine where a child sat under its parent, but it was meant to be used more in the sense of having common names that were used that people then would apply codes to. So for an example, in SNOMED, you'd look for frailty and you'd find the code, and there would be the child codes underneath that as subcodes describing in further detail what was going on with that patient who had frailty. So when you look at coding in a physician's EMR, ideally we're going to start looking at coding in SNOMED. And I understand from talking with representatives from the IMIT Standing Committee, which is the provincial body for oversight for IMIT, that there is work being done to move MSP to accept SNOMED codes in the future. Now that's just something that's still in the discussion phase and not been confirmed and would require some significant software changes. So that is not something that is coming, nor should it be coded when people are putting in billing. So back to frailty. One of the challenges in looking at frailty in a physician's EMR and being able to find frail patients is that it tends to be a fairly subjective decision whether a patient is frail or not. And this is because, as I mentioned before, there are several levels of frailty. It could be mild, it could be moderate, it could be severe. And that's based on one of several different scales that are used to assess frailty. In the BC guidelines, the CHSA scale is used, which is a scale from 0 to 7, 0 being patient is not frail at all. 1 to 3 are mild frailty, 4, 5 moderate, and 6 and 7 severe frailty. what we are considering or planning to do when we develop the templates for all EMRs to have frailty included and being able to look at activities of daily living and independent activities of daily living is that we'll also include one of the assessment scales, and most likely the scale that's associated with the BC guideline, which is, as I mentioned, the CHSA scale. So most physicians, I would warn, do not use any means in their EMR of actually recording frailty. A few do. Those that are in MedAccess are working at having a standardized frailty template, which will record the CHSA scale. MOIS has a standardized way of recording frailty, and many others may record frailty as activities of daily living or independent activities of daily living that are recorded in various ways, including being in a text box. So it really does challenge you when you're going into physician's office, when you're talking to physicians about how they're recording frailty and how to translate that or transform that into a coded frailty problem in the problem list, and that's our goal. So as I suggested, you know, it is fairly subjective. You may be able to search for the CHSA frailty scale, but the key is asking the physician what they're doing to be able to determine who's frail and who's not, and what means they're using to be able to assess patients as being frail. And again, as I suggested, you probably will find that most physicians don't have a standardized way of doing this. It's more eyeball. You know, they'll say, well, you know, Mrs. Jones is quite frail and Mr. Smith is quite frail. They should probably be included in the problem list. So it's a challenge. I'm certainly willing to speak to anybody that's having more difficulty in being able to look through a physician's EMR to try to determine who's frail and who's not. As I mentioned, there's many different ways of doing that. So I'll just pause there on frailty, and before I move to end of life, to check and see if there's any questions that anybody might have. And certainly there's been some situations that people have emailed me about where those questions have arose. But I'll open it up for any questions just now before I move on. So hearing no questions, I'm assuming that you're all dealing with this, and it's...
Sorry, I have one question.
Sure.
For the diagnosis of frailty, is it essential that you do have that CHA score to identify the severity of it? Can you have one or the other, or do you have to have both? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, the problem with the CHSA score is that if you determine that someone, say, has got a frailty level of 2 or 3, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are functionally frail to the point that they then would require further resources. It just is an indication where they are on the continuum. And it does not qualify them for the GPSC incentive funding, complex care frail billing, the $315. Not until they get to a level where they have some functional impairment in both activities of daily living and independent activities of daily living that are documented. And that translates to a CHSA scale of value of 6 or 7. But having that value is not required for the incentive billing, just documentation of the functional impairment. So I would encourage that if you're coding frailty and it's in the problem list, that people document it as mild, moderate, or severe in their problem list, or use the CHSA scale of putting the actual value in their problem list. That way, when we're looking at that cohort of patients that is going to require more intensive care, which is part of panel management, moving from panel cleanup and panel identification, that will be quite important. So differentiating it to mild, moderate, severe, or having the CHSA score will be very helpful.
Thank you.
One additional question. Bruce, you mentioned that part of this exercise was to find out what doctors are doing to code the frail elderly condition, and also if they're using any assessment tools. Do you have any comments on assessment tools over and above the 3 that we mentioned in the end-of-life module, which are the PPS, the SAT, and the ESAS?
Yeah, there's quite a few different assessment tools that are out there. And if you look at the GTAC guidelines, they have a list of functional activities that help people determine the functional level and looking at the activities of daily living and which ones are actually independent activities of daily living as well. That's quite useful. In the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, they use a thing called RUB scores that are composed of 75 or so different measures that they look at to give a combination score that gives an idea of the complexity of the patient, which is often very closely associated with frailty. And there's a number of other different scales and means of assessing people. And we had some discussion about this with the Health Data Coalition as to looking at what we were going to be measuring. And until there's an agreement to a standardized assessment that all the EMRs will have, it's probably something that's left to the individual physician's preferences, as long as it is able to give some idea of what the functional ability of that patient is as it relates to their activities of daily living and their independence level. So I will duck that question a little bit and say that that's work that is going to be pending, that Kelsey and I will be working on as we develop the chronic disease management module refresh and get all that embedded into EMRs and get some subject matter experts partaking in that conversation to make some decisions and make sure that they align with BC guidelines. Okay, so end of life. As you can see from the end of life, the diagnostic code associated with that is V, Victor 66, and there is a SNOMED code with, again, another 9-digit code that's associated. Again, the same issue with frailty. There is actually no ICD-9 code that documents the state of end of life or eligible for end-of-life care. In fact, the SNOMED code itself defines a state of care and a care process rather than a disease process. And as you could well guess and imagine, people have many different reasons that they're in the end of life, or actually, for probably more our purposes from PSP, are not palliative, but eligible for advanced care planning. And we're fortunate as in end of life, as compared with frailty, that we actually do have some means of being able to standardize our approach with how physicians might develop a panel of patients that are eligible for advanced care planning. And that falls back to the end-of-life module and the 4 conditions that would make someone eligible for advanced care planning. One of those is the surprise question. Would you be surprised if this patient were to die within the next 6 months, or some people use 12 months? Sentinel events, where people have had a couple admissions to hospital for, say, something like heart failure, or laboratory or investigations that would suggest a declining health, such as having kidney function that is indicating quite severe kidney disease, or a echocardiogram showing a very low left ventricular ejection fraction. And then finally, patient's preference that they want to be part of advanced care planning and be noted to be eligible for that. There's no good way to put this in the problem list as a problem. It is generally what I'm suggesting to people is that it's in the problem list under care plans, or as I mentioned right at the beginning, under self-management goals or patient wishes. And that this is documented in such a way in the problem list under care plans or patient wishes that it is traceable. And using that code, V66, is actually a palliative code. So using the SNOMED code 103735009 is more appropriate, but could be recorded in many different ways. The key is that people are using a problem list to document that they have had end-of-life conversations. 3 different EMRs, Oscar, InterHealth, and MedAccess.
Bruce, there's a lot of
standardized.
It's very difficult to hear you, Bruce.
Yeah, there's somebody in the background. Oh, is that better now? Yep. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. 3 different EMRs, Oscar, InterHealth, and MedAccess, have standardized an approach to standard data elements for end-of-life based on the PSP end-of-life module that was done through a research project that Dr. Francis Lau led and that I was involved in, along with another of other physicians, including physicians that were involved in the end-of-life module. And we, again, Kelsey Gallant and I will be, this is on our timeline to work at refreshing the end-of-life module and having all the elements standardized across the other EMRs, Wolf and Osler, as well as making sure that it's in MOLE at some time in the near future. And again, you know, these are people that we know will consume resources, both the facility resources and human resources at a higher level of frailty. So it becomes very important to understand who these people are. Increasingly important as we move to self-management support and also to looking at the patient medical home as recording the self-management goals and patient wishes. So I'm going to pause there again and just check and see if there's any other questions. And I do apologize. I do hear that there's this bit of fuzzy feedback going on. So hearing no questions, the final thing that I wanted to touch on is now into panel management. And as you can see from the spreadsheet, we gave 2 examples of panel management. Very important ones, as you have picked up from my previous conversation about frailty and palliative care or end-of-life care advanced directives, is percent of patients with advanced care directives and percent of patients with self-management goals. And unfortunately, at this time, most EMRs do not have a standardized way of recording that patients have had a discussion about advanced care directives, and that there are records in place for things like the most forms or no CPR, or their wishes around end-of-life care have been documented. As mentioned, 3 EMRs have attempted to standardize this, but this hasn't spread to all the other EMRs. And as well with self-management goals, percent of patients with self-management goals, there has been an attempt to standardize this as part of the refresh on heart failure and COPD, which the EMR vendors are in varying stages of completing the requirements for having these as standardized data elements that can be documented in the patient's heart. So self-management goals, having brief action planning included in as part of the template that's accessible by the physician is something that is very near to being released by all the different EMR vendors. And we're just going through the compliance testing with those right now. Kelsey isn't on the phone, unfortunately, on holidays, and so isn't able to update us on where we're at with that right now. But these are just used as 2 examples of panel management. And there's many other different panel management indicators that could be used. And as I've mentioned before, what's key is when you're working with physicians, what we want to do first is really tackle, why are we doing this? We've had phone calls from a number of divisions asking what the purpose is of doing panel cleanup. They want to move to be doing other things. And we need to acknowledge that panel cleanup isn't particularly pretty or exciting, but it is one of the foundational pieces of work that needs to be done. Just starting people on the journey to practice improvement. We need to know those patients that have these conditions, and as I mentioned, understanding patients that are frail, understanding patients that are having end-of-life conversations, who's having self-management goals recorded, who's having their care wishes recorded, and working towards developing a standardized common or shared care plan. The panel cleanup is important by itself, but it's also important with a number of other things that need to happen in parallel, as I mentioned before. Things like having a community-centric approach to patient care, using the spirit of motivational interviewing to work with patients on what matters to them, setting goals, following them up using brief action planning, attending to office efficiencies, and educating about the health literacy and language, and improved meaningful data input into EMRs. One of the things we'll be working on is EMR meaningful use, and to some people that may look very much like what was done in the past with the PO objective data dashboard. And the intent isn't to entirely focus on EMR processes, but to marry those processes to things that are clinically relevant with physicians. And that's the way that you'll get buy-in. If you are very dogmatic and stick to a line that says, no, we have to look at EMR processes, we have to do panel cleanup, and not link that to clinical, practical, meaningful use, that the clinician can relate to will have trouble with engagement. So it's challenging for you all. And again, anybody that has any individual questions or comments or situations that they're running into that are difficult, please feel free to email me. I've had a number of different emails. I share them with Aaliyah and with Kelsey so that we can document those kinds of questions and understand a bit better where our physicians are at, where you need to be at, and what kind of training both physicians and the regional support team coordinators need. So I will stop there. I could go on for a lot longer, and I could show you examples of panel management type indicators and questions, and I could show you how to do that in different EMRs. But we don't have enough time for that today, as we have some other things to discuss. And I'll turn it over to Aaliyah to just check and see if there's any other questions, and then move on with the rest of the agenda.
Bruce, leave it open.
Yeah, this is Margie. I have a question. We're doing the end-of-life module here in Quesnel, so there's a lot of physicians, and so you're just suggesting when they're building their registry to using those various indicators, just to put it in the problem list. And how would you name it?
So in the problem list, in Quesnel, what's the common EMR, or the most common EMR that you're using up there?
We have actually Osler, Wolf, and MOAS.
Yeah, MOAS won't be an issue. You can record the advanced care directive conversations and make it part of a care plan so that it can be searched for. In Wolf and in Osler, I'm not sure in Osler whether they have a care plan section, but anywhere in the medical problems or anywhere in the problem list to document that this patient has had advanced care directive conversation and has an end-of-life care plan is sufficient for now. And if you're in InterHealth or MedAccess, you can actually enter that in a care plan section of the problem list. In Wolf, I'm not sure where that can be entered in, but entering it in the problem list under medical problems would be completely appropriate.
Thank you.
Over to you, Aaliyah.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, if there are no other questions, then I will turn it over to Ronnie and Candace at BCH, and we'll do the last piece of the EMR functionality.
Hi, everyone. It's Candace, and we have with us today. And we were going to present an FAQ document pertaining to the EMR functionality checklist, and that was going to be based on questions from the team. But over the past 2 weeks, we haven't received any questions. However, we did have one typed in the chat that we missed during the last Learning Lab, and Candace is just going to go over that one.
Hello, good morning, everybody. There was a question in the chat that we didn't actually see until we signed off, so we just wanted to cover that. There was a question about lab order sets and whether they were in the EMR or were easy to build. And so as with all EMR questions, it's very different in each of the EMRs, but from what I understand, in most EMRs, they do have a few sets that are pre-populated when you first go in there. However, a lot of the EMRs, it's really easy to create the sets. So if you, so in IntraHealth, as an example, under Maintain, you open 2 windows, Investigations and Lab Sets, and you just hit New, call it whatever you want to call it, and drag over all of the labs that you want to be in that set. And then once you've done that, when you're in a new encounter, you can select that set. Where I struggle as as a coordinator is really what should be in those sets. So a physician should really kind of write out what kind of sets they would like to have. And sometimes they focus on sets that are most commonly used, but I think it's really exceptional and good practice to actually create sets that they don't often use, because then they're struggling to remember which labs am I supposed to order for this not so common condition, and these sets can kind of just be pre-built so that they don't have to struggle to remember what labs to order. They are in the help files. If you use the help files in the EMR, if you type up lab set creation or something like that, there will be some good help files on there. It's good to have one, maybe MOA or office manager, manage that within the clinic so that the physicians aren't creating a whole bunch of different sets, like, 8 doctors in a clinic have 8 different diabetes lab sets. They could really manage it so that they don't have duplicates and things like that, if we can get them to agree on what they think it should be in that specific set. So no, it's not a high-level functionality. They're quite easy to create in most EMRs, but it also would be a good topic for peer mentors. So if you do happen to be able to get a peer mentor in for that physician, it would be a good thing to quickly show them how to do.
What I could suggest there is that if you are in an office where someone is talking about wanting to create as standardized as possible lab order set, go to the BC guidelines under that condition, and very often in there will be suggestions as to initial or routine follow-up laboratory and or other investigations that should be performed. So being able to work from that guideline, that recommendation, is a good place to start if the physician isn't sure.
Thanks, Bruce. Good point.
Thank you. I just also want to mention something else that we were thinking of. When and if you're sending a completed EMR checklist to a physician, please send it as a PDF. Just so it's not being altered, and we're the ones actually doing any changes as we work through the training plan and the document. And now Jo is going to share her perspective as a PSP coordinator using the EMR checklist, and this is without ever having worked with a previous EMR checklist. I'm going to hand it off to Jo.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. I just wanted to touch on my experience. It's been a relatively easy experience. I didn't think at first that it would be. When we were first asked to try these, I thought, how the heck am I going to do it? But I'm finding that the people spoke to really are happy to have a conversation about optimizing their EMR. So basically, with respect to engagement, I didn't know, wherever I was in a setting, a practice setting, whether it's action period or whatever, I just asked whether they want to know what their current state with their EMR is, and if they did, I just said, we have this EMR functionality checklist, and ask them, like, are you interested in doing that? And right off the bat, I tell them it's not funded. Like the time you do this, it's not funded, but you will be able to find out, I guess, where your current state is, and then if there's any kind of support that you need, we can figure out what that looks like after the fact. So far, I've done 4, and I've got 2 booked, and there was no arm twisting or anything. It was very easy to get them to do this, which was really great, and they were completely aware that they didn't get paid, and they didn't even ask why. That was really, really cool. I usually tell them, because they ask how long is it going to be, I say, well, up to 30 minutes, no longer than that, because you don't want to take up too much of their time. I've never really gauged how long I've actually taken, but it's well within that time, and they're happy with that. The other thing, I mean, you really need to know your physician. Some physicians are, talk-a-lots, and then you've got to figure out the best way to figure out, if you know that, if they might take longer or whatever, you kind of know your physician for sure. How I got around it, Talk-A-Lot Doc, was basically when we do the questionnaire, I sit with them and I say, look, it's pretty mechanical. It's kind of like if you've done the adult mental health module, it's kind of like the diagnostic assessment interview. I'm going to ask you some questions, right? And then the checklist itself, and I show it to them. It has categories, right, numbered categories. It has descriptions of the categories. So I'm going to ask you about these categories, whether you're aware of how they're utilized in your EMR, and then basically from you, I'm going to ask for you to say yes or no, and then we're going to keep going. If they have comments, I'm going to write it in the comment section. I also mentioned the peer mentor process, that we, if there are anything that they'd like to work on, we are happy to set them up with a peer mentor who will, support them in optimizing their EMR based on what their no answers are. And in some cases, they've answered yes to certain things, but they would say, well, yes to this, but not really to that. So I would also indicate in the comment section, like or whatever, that they want a little bit more enhancement of that category, right, in some capacity, right? So when they do say no, I ask them, do you want to learn this? They usually say yes. That's not ever a problem. So after that, basically we have our meeting, whatever, our half hour. I tell them that I'm going to go back and I'm going to put it all, like enter all this into the sheet itself in the office, and I'll send them a score. So that they're very happy with that. They don't have a problem with it. We find out different things that they want to do with respect to workflow and other things as well. It's not necessarily just the fact that we're going to, that their mentor might be the option, but there might be some workflow things as well. So two things I've noted so far about the scoring. If the EMR is not able to perform the functionality of any of the categories, I don't. Hello?
Guys, somebody, the whole music playing?
Somebody has put me on hold.
We're going to try and mute it. Got one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There you go. Sorry, Joe.
So if the EMR is not able to perform the functionality of any of the categories, it's not the doctor's fault, right? So when we do determine whether or not that is, it's only happened in one case for me. It's basically when I had the conversation with the doctor here, I said, I don't think your EMR does this. Well, he asked, does the EMR do this? And I brought it here to my colleagues, and I understood that the functionality did not work. And so basically when I had the conversation with the doctor, he just changed his denominator himself. So basically out of 6, the denominator becomes a 5 in his own thinking. Yes, his score is his score, but he can't learn that because the EMR doesn't provide that, right? So that thing, the doctor percentage score based on the functionality of the EMR is what we talked about with respect to that experience. The other thing with another doctor is basically the true doctor percentage is based on what the doctor knows about the full EMR. So in some cases, in most cases, in all cases but one, sorry, the doctor was happy, assumed that the admin registration billing tasks were done and known about, whatever, done correctly or whatever. So my task then, if the MOA or manager wasn't present, was to go to them and say, look, the doctor doesn't know about these, but assumes, are they, can I ask you these questions? And then they would help me fill in those blanks, right? And then we would kind of get a clinic percentage based on that doctor's usability or whatever. So it's not necessarily that the doctor knows those things. He just assumes they're done, and then I verify that with the clinic manager or the MOA. With one doctor, she wants to know everything. She wants to know exactly how to do all the categories. So her MU score was very low because she didn't know a lot of these registration tasks or admin tasks or billing tasks and things like this, and she wants to learn them. So her score, with her optimization, it'll become a true doctor percentage of her ability to use the EMR without any assistance whatsoever. So I just wanted to, those are the two things I've noted so far in my time spent doing this. So with respect to follow-up after that, I've already arranged 3 peer mentor visits, and mostly after the next step is with respect to the peer mentor visit is to follow up with the doctor to kind of find out which no's became yeses, because we need to then go in and change the score. I completely agree with what Ronnie said about saving the one that you send to the doctor as a PDF, because you want to keep that as a baseline, and then the one that you're actually working on is your working document. So at the end, when they're finally optimized, potentially, hopefully, and enlightened, we could actually see their journey, right? So where they were and where they came. So we get a baseline, and then we get hopefully a nice final outcome. And then potentially, I've already talked to 3 of them about becoming peer mentors, right? So they want to actually optimize themselves so that they can go and teach their colleagues as well. So that experience has been really cool. So I would definitely advocate for a PDF and then a working copy, right? So and instead of different versions of different iterations. I don't think the EMR checklist stops with the first assessment. To me, it's a continuation to see an improvement throughout the trajectory. If the doctors have any questions that I can't answer, I will go to my colleagues first to see if they can advise me, and then I would ask a peer mentor, but most likely at this point we've already arranged a peer mentor, so they will have that conversation themselves. It's usually a clinical thing, right, that the peer mentor I would think that it would be more of a clinical thing, or potentially not, a usability thing that the peer mentor would be able to help with for sure. In documentation, there are 2 tabs. If you look at the bottom of the checklist itself, the Excel spreadsheet, there's 2 tabs. So one is the actual checklist itself, where you're documenting, where you're writing your yes and no's and documenting in the comment section. I find in the moment the comment section is tiny, so I'm writing all over the document in order to, get my notes, but I like everything on the document. Everybody has different ways of how they collect information. And then so I'll populate the comment section with the comments that I made, and then I'll use the other section, what's it called? Sorry, the training plan. Sorry, it's right here in front of me. I just lost my train of thought. The EMR training plan is where I'll put in exactly what they said, and I always put on the first tab the number, the category number to which this thing, so that way to which they want help with. So basically, if they want help with number 12, I'll put bracket 12, so that way I can easily go to the checklist to number 12, right, and see whether or not they've learned that, as opposed to trying to find it later on. And then, so I'll document the category number, what the category is, and then basically use a plan, whether it's a peer mentorship with a peer mentorship process, or whether or not they need to. It starts with a peer mentorship process anyway, and then anything that's not learned that potentially might need to go to a vendor or something else is kind of taken care of, I would assume, because I'm not at that point yet, later on after they've had their peer mentor work. We follow up as well with the peer mentors, so with the mentees, to see whether or not there's anything else they needed to learn, and the peer mentors to see, whether or not they also found the time satisfactory, and if there's anything else they find that the mentee needs to actually work on, and then we would create another statement of work based on that in the peer mentor process. I think I covered everything. It's a pretty cool experience, I must say. I didn't think it would be that easy, but I came back pretty pumped after the first one, and I went in kind of nervous because I don't know. I mean, I know what the EMRs look like, but I can't work around an EMR to save my life. It's their knowledge, right? As I have questions, I have support to be able to go back and ask those questions in my world, in my team, among my team, and among our wider team. So we're working on supporting their knowledge. And there's a lot of, not only peer mentor opportunities in here, there's a lot of actual follow-up and coaching opportunities as well. It doesn't just stop with the peer mentor work. That's about it.
Thank you, Joe. I just want to also add, if you do have a physician that is looking to do all the MOA pieces. So in the ideal world, you would meet with both the MOA and the physician at the same time. If that doesn't happen, try your best again to meet with the MOA first, and then the physician, and then again, it's easier to circle back with an MOA than it is to circle back with the physician. And the other thing is, if the physician does want to actually do all the MOA items and wants to learn it, and your MOA is already doing that, they can probably just do the in-house training, because the MOA can just train the physician there.
Yeah, that's what we're arranging with this other doctor. Yeah. So in-house training for sure. But I haven't tried what Ronnie has recommended. My route was going with the doctor first and then the MOA filling in the blanks. I don't know whether the other is a quicker way or whatever, but that's the route I took. Is that in most cases the MOA was with me, like most. I haven't done very many, but in the case where the MOA wasn't, I just backtracked and said these are the ones I need answers to because the doctor wasn't sure.
Candace, Joe, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your experience. It's been really eye-opening for those of us who have been trying to create the document, and it's been great feedback, so I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. I also just wanted to comment that I think it's so great that you've taken the opportunity with your EMR checklist to then find peer mentors or identify people who might potentially be peer mentors, because we really need more of them. So I think that was a really great point that I take away, is that, you know, it's not just the process and helping them get to a place where they're using their EMR really well, but then can we take that and leverage that into the community and have more peer mentors. So I thought that was a really good comment. The last thing that I wanted to add is that even though some of the functionality on the checklist is very MOA-centered, I think it is of value to run through it with the GP, because you might find a disconnect. An MOA might be doing all the billing, but a physician might go, you know what, I don't actually know and I don't see them, and maybe I'd like to get a report on a regular basis, or, you know, I haven't actually asked them about rejections. I hope there's not about a lot of outstanding rejections. And then, so it can facilitate a conversation where there may be a disconnect and they just didn't know it. So I think it's a good value to kind of run through the topics with the physician that are MOA related, just in case there is a gap in communication.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I would still, even if we were to run them with an MOA ahead of time, I would still ask the questions. I would still say to the physician, like I'd cover that topic with the physician, say your MOA said this, do you have any questions or do you want to learn any of this?
Yeah, I think that's great.
For sure.
And one of the hot topics that from the MOA portion that comes up with physicians is WCB billing. That's usually an issue that they would like for MOAs to have more training on. So we're going to open it up to any questions. So if you can't come up with one now and do later, please email either Candace, Joe, or I with any questions you may have. So anyone?
Yay, we were clear.
No, it's Bruce. I have one question.
Yeah.
We're getting, or I've been hearing more around why are we doing this from divisions more than I am physicians themselves. And I'm curious as to how all of you folks are approaching that question, if you've heard it. Maybe you haven't heard it. Maybe people aren't asking why they get it. But I'm curious about that.
So I haven't heard it from anyone yet, but we're working with physicians that would like support on their EMR. So it's not a mandatory piece. There's no funding attached. So it's physicians that have reached out for support, or we've been in their clinic for either some sort of visit in regards to a module, and they've mentioned some areas that they could possibly work on, and that's when we bring it up. Is it possible to do the EMR checklist with you, maybe see what else we can see comes out of it? And also, it's not funded, so it's really them wanting the support. And Candace, anything else?
Yeah, the local division that I work with, they're really curious as to where their physicians are at in the community. And so we were talking about trying to be able to convey to divisions where everybody's at, what the majority vendors are, and what their level of use is. And are there any trends in how we can support physicians with their EMR use? And so in thinking about how we would report it to divisions to let them know where their physicians are at in the community, we thought this might be a good tool to just, gather all that information and aggregate it and be able to give the information to divisions so that they just get a good pulse on where the physicians are at.
Yeah, and for myself, this is Jo. I haven't had any questions from the divisions about what we're doing. I'm pretty transparent with what we're doing, what I'm doing in the community, and all I've had is support to do that.
It's Bruce again. I would really strongly support that connection with aggregating the information that you're getting from doing this work and passing that on to the division. I think that's a critical piece of communication that helps divisions and the people that are on the boards of divisions understand how important this work is and where their physicians are at. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And that's why we put in the MU levels that we've adopted from PEDO, just so we're working with kind of the same framework, and it means something to them, and they've had experience with that. So moving forward, when we speak to physicians who are at a certain level, it'll mean something, and it's not something we've completely recreated on our own. And some of the physicians have actually gone back a few steps since the PEDO days, and they've got their funding, but they've kind of gone back a few steps and are thinking, oh, we used to do ABCD, and we're kind of not doing it anymore. So they kind of want that support to get those skills back.
Hey guys, it's Aaliyah. I just wanted to tack on a little bit around what we're sharing with divisions and everything. It's definitely part of a bigger conversation around sort of what data we're collecting, what we're able to share out. Do we share aggregate? Can we share individual physician data? Like what is it are we actually sharing? So some of that is included, or there's talk of sort of putting some of that into the comment data sharing agreements. So there's some work happening with that, but it's definitely part of a bigger conversation around how we're collaborating with divisions and working through that. And so it's something that we're really looking at the implications of and grappling with centrally and with your leads and your managers as well.
Thank you.
So, well, one thing I forgot to mention, whatever, if the doctor asks, like, do we need to be on the EMR or whatever when we do this, I basically leave it up to them. One doctor actually was showing me everything that, all the yeses, she was showing me exactly where she found those things or whatever, right? And it was kind of neat to see her excitement about the fact that she knew a lot of stuff. So I just built on that, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, wow, you're pretty much getting optimized and stuff like that. And they like that. Others, you know, they're happy to just, it's whatever they want. It doesn't matter to me. There's no stipulation that they have to have the EMR on or off. That's another thing.
I would just, one thing that I would add to that, in my experience and what I've heard from the old PEDO pals that used to do this as well. It is surprising that sometimes people think that they know how to do something or can do it. Very rarely deliberately try to mislead you. And when you actually get them to show you, it sort of exposes, not necessarily weaknesses, but it does expose some opportunities to understand exactly what they think you're asking, and also to understand the process that they're using. And sometimes even the process they're using can be 5 mouse clicks too many, or might really involve a very circuitous way, or by conversely, it could show you something that you learn and is new. And I think there's an opportunity here not only to expose that a little bit more fully, but for you to learn about how the EMR works by having them show you. So it's a learning opportunity for you as well. But I agree. I mean, it is up to the physician to see what works best. But if it's left open and they say, well, what do you want? Say yes, you'd love to have it as a learning opportunity.
Right. The only thing about that is it could take a little bit longer because you're spending more time on the questions as they're showing you things. But yeah, the one session where she showed me stuff was great because I was able to ask them questions. Well, why do you go that route and things like that? And then she would answer. Yep. So I agree with you completely. The only thing is you have to say if we're going to, you know, it might take a little bit longer if we have the EMR up because you're going to be wanting to show me stuff, right? And they do like to show you stuff. Any other questions?
So as you're working through the document or looking through it and you've come up with anything, please just send us an email. We're happy to help you out.
Or call.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we were clear.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, Ronnie and Candace, Bruce, Joe. Thanks for sharing your experience using the tool. We really appreciate hearing that. Looks like we have some extra time today, so I will give you all 25 minutes back in your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.